They say grief has a sound, but for me it started with a silence. Not a scream, not a siren, just the quiet click of the front door and the hum of her rollerblades fading down the sidewalk. It was a Sunday warm, ordinary safe. She was headed to her best friend's house just a few blocks over. She never made it, and for 20 years that silence sat in our home like a living thing. Until one day in Oregon, I looked into a dusty pawn shop window and saw them. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Robert Whitmore. I'm from Rockford, Illinois. I'm 58 now, but back then when it all began, I was 38 working maintenance at a manufacturing plant just outside town. My wife Helen taught English at the local high school. We lived in a 2-story colonial on Elmwood Avenue with a porch swing out front and a lilac bush that bloomed like clockwork every spring. We had one child, our daughter Emily Grace, 12 years old, full of motion. That kid never walked if she could run. Sundays used to be our quiet day. Mornings at the diner, afternoons folding laundry, evenings watching the weather roll in over the back fields. We weren't fancy people. We didn't chase big vacations or keep up with trends. We believed in routines, in being present. We thought if we followed the rules, if we loved her well and stayed close, nothing truly bad could touch us. That belief held until it didn't. It was Helen's idea to take the trip to Fern Creek. 20 years after we lost Emily, and she still wouldn't say the word vacation out loud. She called it a change of scenery. Said it was time. That maybe we needed to be somewhere the air didn't carry memories. So we booked 3 nights in a small rental apartment above a bookstore in town. Fern Creek, Oregon. It looked like something out of a painting. One long main street canopied in old trees. Farmer's market every Saturday. Shingled rooftops, old diners with neon signs. It was early June, same time of year we lost Emily. We walked slowly through the market that first afternoon, Helen stopping to look at Pottery Soap's jars of local jam. I stayed a few paces behind hands in my jacket, trying to act like I was present. But I wasn't. I kept thinking how bright it all was. Too bright. The voices of vendors, the sound of children laughing. It made my skin itch. Helen tried to pull me in with her usual grace. Try this cheese, Robert, or this reminds me of our first apartment, but I wasn't ready. Not really. We passed a small storefront near the end of the street. Faded green paint. Hand-lettered sign that read Timber Treasures. Antique shop, clearly. The kind that smells like dust and rusted things. Helen smiled when she saw it. "This place looks sweet," she said. "Go on in," I told her. "I'll wait out here." She went inside. Bell on the door gave a soft jingle. I leaned against a lamppost, reached for a cigarette. And that's when it happened. My eyes drifted toward the display window. Nothing dramatic, just drifted. There, sitting on the middle shelf between a cracked porcelain doll and a stack of old books, was a pair of rollerblades. Pink and blue. Chunky plastic straps, scuffed just enough to feel real. I stepped closer, one foot, then another. The cigarette slipped from my fingers. I couldn't breathe. The color combo, the wear marks, even the size. They weren't similar. They weren't close. They were hers. Emily's rollerblades, and scratched into the front toe guard like a whisper from another life. EGW Emily Grace Whitmore. That's when I opened the door. Not calm, not careful. Just slammed my way into that antique shop, my heart pounding like it hadn't in 20 years. And that was the moment everything shifted. I didn't say anything when the rollerblades hit the counter. I couldn't. My hands were shaking and my throat felt like it had closed up. Helen just stood beside me. Silent, one hand hovering near her mouth like she was afraid to touch the truth sitting in front of us. The colors were the same bubblegum pink teal blue, the thick purple straps. But it was the initials that made it real. Scratched into the toe guard, right where I remembered, just shallow enough to be missed unless you knew where to look, EGW Emily Grace Whitmore. I had carved them myself with a pocket knife the week after her birthday. I don't remember why exactly, just one of those little dad things. She'd asked me too, I think. Said she wanted everyone at the rink to know they were hers. And now, here they were 20 years later, sitting in a glass case in a junk shop in a town we had no connection to. I told the shopkeeper, tried to explain. These belonged to my daughter. She disappeared in 1986. She was wearing them when she left the house that day. He barely blinked. Just said they weren't ours anymore. If we wanted them, we'd have to pay the price on the tag, $45. I remember staring at him thinking maybe he hadn't understood. But he had. He just didn't care. Helen tried to calm me down, said maybe it wasn't worth fighting about, that it could just be a coincidence. But I knew. I knew before I flipped them over. That was just confirmation. I told him again, these weren't just some vintage find. They were evidence. He rolled his eyes, started reaching for them like he was going to take them back behind the counter. I held on. Told him again our daughter had been taken. These were hers. He told us if we weren't going to pay, we needed to leave. Then he tried to push me toward the door. That's when a police officer came in, just a local patrolman making his rounds through the market. He saw what was going on, stepped between us, and asked what the problem was. I told him everything as best I could. That our daughter had disappeared 2 decades ago in Illinois. That we'd never stopped looking. That she'd been wearing those rollerblades when she left the house. He looked skeptical at first. I could see it in his face. But then I showed him the initials, the serial number on the underside. I told him I still had the original receipt back home in Rockford tucked in a drawer with every other piece of hope we'd never been able to throw away. He stepped back, spoke quietly into his radio. I heard him mention a missing child. Illinois, 1986. A few minutes later, his whole demeanor shifted. He looked at me with something different in his eyes, not doubt, but weight. Like he understood this might actually be something. He took the skates and placed them into an evidence bag. Told us his name, Officer Brennan, and asked if we'd come down to the station to give a formal statement. We followed his cruiser in silence. The Fern Creek Police Station was small, tucked off Main Street behind a library. Modest brick building with a few squad cars parked out front. The inside felt clean, quiet, oddly warm. Not what you picture when you think of a place where the past might come back to life. Officer Brennan led us into a small room with 4 chairs and a table. The rollerblades sat in the middle of it, now sealed in plastic. He asked us to describe Emily. I told him she was 12 when she vanished. Auburn hair, green eyes, 5'2", tall for her age, left-handed. She had a scar on her right forearm from climbing the backyard fence. Fell onto the bird bath when she was 7. Helen filled in the date June 15th, 1986. A Sunday. She'd left the house around 3 p.m., rollerblading to her friend Samantha's place just a few blocks away. Samantha called us around 5 asking if Emily was still coming over. That's when we knew. That's when everything cracked. Brennan nodded, writing as we talked. Said he'd called the detective on duty, someone named Marshall, who would be joining us shortly. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Man in his 40s, plain clothes, quiet eyes. Introduced himself as Detective Marshall. Sat down across from us, opened a file. Said he'd reached out to Illinois already, and that our daughter's case was still marked open. I can't explain how strange it felt to hear that. Open. Like a window left cracked for 20 years, still letting the wind in. He asked us to walk him through everything. So we did. The flyers, the search parties, the phone calls to tip lines that never went anywhere. The nights I slept in the car because I thought I might spot her riding past. The private investigators we hired. The newspaper ads. The dead ends. All of it. Marshall listened the whole time, barely interrupted. Then he asked where we were staying and if we were okay to be contacted at any time. I said yes, of course. We weren't going anywhere. He said they'd start looking into the shop's inventory records, that they'd do a full background check on the shop owner, Victor Manson. I remembered that name from earlier. The employee back at the store had said it offhand like it didn't matter. But when Marshall pulled up a DMV photo, both Helen and I just stared at it. The man was in his 50s now, stern face, thinning hair. Didn't recognize him, but that didn't mean he hadn't crossed paths with our daughter. According to the report, Manson bought the shop 18 years ago. Before that, not much. Sparse records, no criminal history, but no real roots either. Marshall said he wasn't in town that weekend, supposedly returning in 2 days. Said they'd bring him in for questioning as soon as he was back. We left the station just before sunset. The sky had started to turn muted orange, fading into gray. I told Helen I needed to walk past the shop one more time, just to see it again. She was reluctant, but she came with me. Timber Treasures looked closed, but the side door caught my eye. Someone was coming out. A man in a leather jacket and a cowboy hat pulled low over his face. Something about his profile looked familiar. He crossed the street toward a black car where another man stood waiting with a little girl beside him. Blonde, maybe 8 or 9. Pigtails. When the man in the hat bent down to talk to her, she flinched. It was quick, but I saw it. Helen tried to explain it away, said maybe she was tired, maybe he told her no about something. But I couldn't shake it. The way she recoiled, the way his hand lingered too long on her shoulder. Then they were gone. Drove off without looking back. I turned to the shopkeeper who'd just locked up and asked him straight, was that Victor Manson? He rolled his eyes, said no. It was Manson's brother. Said he didn't owe me any answers. Then he got on a bus and disappeared down the road. We walked back to the rental in silence. Helen went to grab takeout from the Chinese place on the corner. I stayed behind, sat on the front steps, lit a cigarette I didn't want. The street was quiet, street lamp humming. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and went silent again. That's when I saw her. Just across the road, half hidden behind a utility pole. A girl, thin, maybe 10 or 11, standing still, watching the house. I called out, kept my voice calm, asked if she was all right. She stepped forward slowly, said her name was Carla, and then she said something I haven't been able to forget. "Please, sir, can you help me save my sister?" She looked like she'd been out there a while. Dirt on her shoes, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, oversized jacket slipping off her shoulder. But it was her eyes that stopped me, focused, steady, like she'd already weighed the cost of coming forward. I asked again if she was all right, and she nodded slowly. "I'm fine," she said, "but my sister's not." She stepped closer, voice low like she didn't want anyone else to hear. A man took her, the one with the cowboy hat. I saw her today. I followed them, but I couldn't do anything alone. I didn't speak right away, just listened. She said her name was Carla, that she'd run away from an orphanage nearby St. Catherine's. Said she'd seen the man with Jasmine, her younger sister, in the market earlier that afternoon. I asked if she'd told anyone. She nodded once. The people at the orphanage don't listen. They said Jasmine was adopted. But it's not real. He didn't fill out any papers. He just came and took her. They said it was arranged, that it was legal. But I know it wasn't. She paused, then looking past me toward the apartment. "I saw the girl with the pigtails," I said, "outside the toy shop." She flinched when he touched her. Carla looked up at me. "That's her. That's Jasmine." I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, that maybe things weren't as bad as they sounded, but the unease had been growing since we walked into Timber Treasures, since the lie about Manson being out of town, since the shopkeeper rushed to lock the door. I looked at Carla, and I remembered all the times I'd tried to tell someone Emily was still out there. 20 years of people gently lowering their eyes, saying they understood, saying it was time to move on. Carla was doing what I hadn't been able to do back then, refusing to let it go. I didn't know what the right thing was. I only knew what I couldn't do. I couldn't tell her no. I told her to wait by the steps while I grabbed my car keys, sent a quick text to Helen. Taking the car. Something came up. Use your key. Start dinner without me. It wasn't much of an explanation, but I figured I'd be back before she started to worry. Carla gave me directions as we drove. Not exact roads, just landmarks. A playground with faded slides. A water tower. An abandoned fruit stand. Her voice was quiet the whole ride. I could tell she was watching everything, afraid she might miss something. Finally, we turned off the main road onto a gravel path, narrow and overgrown. At the end of it sat a small camper park, maybe 7 or 8 units tucked into the trees. Most were dark, but one stood out, a white and green camper with warm yellow light in the windows. That's the one, Carla said. I turned off the engine and coasted to a stop a little ways back. From where we sat, we could see the front steps and a sliver of the inside through the curtain gap. There wasn't any sound, no movement. I asked her again if she was sure. She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. She's in there. I know it. I opened the car door, told her to stay close, but if anything felt wrong, we'd leave immediately. The gravel crunched under our feet as we walked. I knocked once. No answer. Knocked again, firmer this time. After a few seconds, the door opened. A man stood there, taller than me. Solid-build eyes, sharp. I recognized him from the street. He hadn't been the one in the cowboy hat, but he'd been standing by the black sedan. His eyes went from me to Carla and back. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. I told him my name. Told him the girl beside me had reason to believe her sister was inside. "This one," he said, pointing to Carla. "She's trouble. Been sneaking around ever since her sister got placed. She can't accept that someone else gave Jasmine a better life." "Was she legally adopted?" I asked. "Of course," he said without hesitation. "My boss handled everything. I'm just his assistant. Drove down with him to pick the kid up. That's all. He said his name was Mike. Claimed Manson had adopted Jasmine. That everything was filed through the proper channels. I asked if I could speak with Manson. He said Manson wasn't there, had already left. You just missed him, he said. Took Jasmine to her new home up north." But as he spoke, I heard something behind him. A sound, small, the kind of muffled whisper a child makes when trying not to be heard. Mike's head turned slightly. "That's just my boy," he said. "Sleeping in the back. We're done talking now. You need to take that girl back where she came from. She's not your problem." He started to close the door. Carla stepped forward. "You're lying," she said, her voice clear for the first time. "You and that man you took her." Mike stopped. Didn't say anything. Just narrowed his eyes. "Leave," he said flatly. "Now, before this becomes something else." I backed away slowly, Carla beside me. We got back in the car. I kept watching the door, half expecting him to come out again. He didn't. Carla was quiet as we pulled back onto the road. Her hands were clenched tight in her lap. "I'm not making it up," she said softly. "I know," I replied. And I did. There was something in that camper. Something wrong. Something familiar. I couldn't explain it. But I'd lived with the silence long enough to know when a child is being hidden. Carla turned her head toward the window. "If I show you where they go sometimes, will you help me?" I didn't answer right away. Just kept driving. Trees blurred past. The sky had gone from dusk to black. I thought of the girl in the shop window, the one with the pigtails, and the woman behind the curtain who looked like my daughter. If Carla was right, if this was part of something bigger, I wasn't sure where it ended, but I knew where it started. It started with a pair of rollerblades, and now a child no one believed was pointing the way forward. I told her yes, I'd help. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think I even closed my eyes. After I dropped Carla off a block away from the shelter, I sat in the parked car for nearly an hour, staring at the empty sidewalk, waiting to see if anyone followed her. No one did. Eventually, I drove back to the Airbnb and climbed the stairs like I was walking into someone else's life. Helen had already gone to bed. The light over the kitchen sink was still on, casting a pale ring across the floor. I stood there for a while, one hand on the back of a dining chair, trying to slow my thoughts enough to move. I didn't tell her what happened. I couldn't, not yet. She'd seen what it had done to me the first time, how the weeks turned into years, and the years into something heavier. If I spoke the words out loud again, if I admitted I thought I'd seen our daughter's face behind a curtain in a camper van, I knew she'd hear the old ache in my voice, the one that never healed right. I sat at the table with a cup of black coffee and tried to remember the woman's face. Just for a second, our eyes had met through the window, and something in the shape of her jaw, the angle of her shoulders, it had stopped me cold. I'd studied those progression photos for years. Age 12, 16, 20, 32. I knew what hope could do to memory. But this wasn't imagined. It wasn't distant. That face belonged to someone I'd once lifted onto my shoulders in the backyard just to help her reach the stars. I stayed up until the sky started shifting. Just before 6, I called the police station. Detective Marshall wasn't in yet, but I left a message. Told them I had something I needed to share. After that, I drove. No destination. Just circled through the town, past the same landmarks Carla had pointed out: gas station with the bent sign, a diner with faded awnings, a row of houses with peeling fences. I ended up near the edge of town, parked behind a grocery store, and waited. Around 9, my phone buzzed. Marshall had gotten the message, asked if I could come in. I did. I kept my voice steady when I told him what I'd seen about the camper, the girl, the man in the hat. I even mentioned Carla. That part he didn't seem too sure about. Runaway kids come and go, he said, especially in towns with small shelters and not enough staff. But he wrote it all down, didn't interrupt. When I told him I thought the woman I saw might be Emily, grown now different, but still her, he just nodded. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. I asked him what would happen if I was right. He said if there was any chance at all, they'd follow it. He had someone checking into Victor Manson already pulling up past records and purchase logs from the shop. So far, nothing concrete. But no red flags either. The kind of man who doesn't leave much behind. I told him about the shopkeeper lying, saying Manson was out of town when he was clearly in that alley with the little girl. Marshall jotted that down too. I could tell he believed something was off. He just didn't know what yet. That afternoon, Helen and I went back to the market. I didn't want to. My stomach was in knots, but she needed normalcy. Needed a reminder that the world kept moving even when ours didn't. We bought cherries from a local farmer and sat on a bench beneath the shade of an old maple. She reached for my hand and told me the trip had been good for us. That even with the strange twist of the rollerblades, maybe it was fate nudging us forward. I nodded, but I couldn't meet her eyes. I hadn't told her about Carla, or the camper, or the face I couldn't shake. That night I told her I needed to check something at the police station. She didn't press, just asked me to pick up more milk if I passed the store. I took the car and circled back to the camper park. I didn't have a plan, just parked a few spots down and waited again. Lights were on in the same unit. I watched shadows move behind the curtains, tall, short, still. Around 8:30, the door opened. Mike stepped out, lit a cigarette, looked around. Then he locked the door behind him and walked off toward the trees. I waited another 10 minutes, then got out and approached. The gravel was loose under my shoes, but the air felt still, like the whole stretch of land was holding its breath. I didn't knock this time, just pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. I circled around back, crouched beneath a window. I heard soft voices inside, a woman calm but strained, and a child whispering something over and over. The words weren't clear, but the tone was fear. I stayed only a moment longer, then left. I didn't want to scare them. I didn't want to alert anyone before I understood what was really happening. The next morning, I went back to the station and gave Marshall everything, locations, times, who was present. He thanked me, said they were building a timeline, that Manson would be back in town soon, and once he was, they'd bring him in for questioning. But I could feel the limitations. They needed warrants, proper channels, coordination with child welfare and other agencies. They couldn't just break down a door because a grieving father said he saw a ghost. That afternoon, I sat outside Timber Treasures again across the street at a bench near a bus stop. I watched who came in, who went out. I saw the shopkeeper again. No sign of Manson, no sign of the girl, no sign of Emily. Around 4 Hosishes, I finally went in, walked through the store slow, pausing at each shelf. The rollerblades were gone now, taken by the police. But everything else was still there, bits of someone's life tucked between broken clocks and old coffee tins. The shopkeeper didn't say much, just watched me from the counter. I asked if Manson was due back soon. He shrugged. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. I asked if he had anyone else working under him. Any family in town. He paused for a second, then shook his head. Nope. Just me. I didn't push, just walked out. The sun was lower now, casting longer shadows across the street. I stood at the corner a minute longer, watching the side alley. Still empty, but I had a feeling it wouldn't stay that way. That night back at the Airbnb, I told Helen the truth. About the girl, about the camper, about the woman I'd seen and the way she looked at me. She didn't cry, just sat on the edge of the bed holding one of Emily's old birthday cards she'd packed in her travel bag. One she used to carry when things felt heavy, a piece of paper from a time before. "What if you're right?" she said, "and it's her?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because the next day, I wouldn't need memory, or instinct, or photographs. I'd see her again, and this time she'd look back. The next morning started out like the others, quiet, gray, and heavier than it should have been. Helen made coffee and asked if I wanted to go walk the trail behind the bookstore. I told her I needed to check back in with the station first, see if there were any updates on Manson's return. She didn't argue. Just reminded me to bring my phone this time and not disappear for hours. I said I would, but I already knew where I was going. I didn't head to the station. I drove out toward the edge of town, retracing the route Carla had shown me earlier that week. The trees were still thick, heavy with spring growth, and the road still narrow enough to make a person feel like they weren't supposed to be there. The camper van was gone. I sat across from the property just inside the tree line and waited. The house behind the clearing looked the same. Same porch, same cars, same dead silence. After about 20 minutes, a dark SUV pulled into the driveway. 2 men got out, one tall, one stockier. I didn't recognize either of them, but something about the way they carried themselves felt rehearsed, like they weren't there to visit, more like they were following a routine. They opened the side door without knocking, walked inside, and didn't come back out. I stayed parked another hour, then left. Back in town, I stopped by Timber Treasures. It was open, but the shopkeeper wasn't behind the counter. Just a sign taped to the bell. Back in 10 minutes. I walked through slowly. Same cluttered shelves. Same corners filled with broken furniture and mismatched silverware. But this time I was looking for something specific. Not big, not obvious, just something that didn't belong. I found it halfway through the back aisle underneath a stack of old board games. A box, cardboard, unmarked, taped twice across the top. I opened it carefully and saw what looked like kids' items hairbrush coloring books, a small blue backpack with faded cartoon decals. Inside the front pocket was a name tag, Jasmine. I didn't take anything. I didn't move it from the shelf. I just walked back to the front and stood there until the shopkeeper returned. When he came in, he barely looked at me, said something about a delivery, and slipped behind the counter. I asked him directly, had he ever seen a girl named Jasmine Blonde Young, maybe 8 or 9? He paused, said the name didn't ring a bell. I told him I found something in the store with that name on it. His face shifted just slightly. Then he said people brought in all kinds of things. Maybe it came from a donation bin. Maybe it came in a box from an estate sale. Nothing was tracked individually. He was calm, too calm. I nodded and stepped outside, called the station from the sidewalk and asked for Detective Marshall. He wasn't in, left another message. I didn't want to push too hard, but I told the woman on the phone it was urgent, that something new had turned up. I walked the street a while after that, tried to shake the feeling that something was moving around me faster than I could keep up with, a current I'd stepped into without knowing the depth. Around 5 o'clock, I pulled back into the parking lot of the Airbnb. As I got out of the car, I noticed a girl standing by the mailbox, small frame, hoodie pulled up. She didn't speak until I was close. "It's me," she said quietly. "Carla." I looked around. The street was empty. I asked how she got there. She said she ran again. Said she couldn't stay quiet. "They're leaving," she said. "Tonight, or early morning." I heard them say it. He said it's not safe here anymore. I asked who said that. The man in the hat. "Victor. He told Mike to pack up and be ready to drive by dawn. He's taking Jasmine with him." She was holding something in her hands, a photograph, bent at the edges. She handed it to me. It showed Jasmine in a yellow dress sitting on the porch of that same house outside town. Next to her was a woman with auburn hair. The angle was distant, like it had been taken through a car window, but even blurry, even half-shadowed, I saw the shape of her mouth, the arch of her brow. It wasn't just resemblance anymore, it was confirmation. I didn't know who took the photo or when or how Carla got her hands on it, but it didn't matter. I told her to come with me. We got in the car and headed straight to the station. Marshall was there this time. I showed him the photo, told him everything, about the box in the shop, the name tag, the 2 men, the plan to leave. He listened without interruption. His face didn't change, but his pen moved faster. When I was done, he looked at Carla and asked if she was willing to go on record. She nodded, said she'd do whatever it took to get her sister out. He stood up and left the room without a word. A few minutes later, he came back and told me to stay available. Said they were going to pull everything Manson's business filings, travel records, cell data. Said it was time. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sit still. Helen kept asking questions I didn't have answers to. I showed her the photograph. She stared at it for a long time. Didn't say anything at first. Then she pointed to the shape of the woman's wrist. "That's Emily," she said. "Her left wrist. She broke it when she was 9. The bone healed wrong. She's always had a slight bend there. Look at it." I looked. She was right. The scar was still there. Faint, but real. I sat down and tried to breathe. Everything that came after moved fast. Faster than I was ready for. Because once the truth begins to show itself, it doesn't stop. And the next time I saw that woman in the photo, she wasn't behind glass or in a picture or a memory. She was standing in the doorway staring back at me. I left the house that evening without telling Helen where I was going. I didn't want to worry her, not more than she already was. but I couldn't sit still another night knowing they might be gone by morning. Carla had said they were leaving, that Victor Manson planned to take Jasmine and vanish before daylight. And after everything we'd learned, I believed her. I had to see for myself. I brought the rental car around just after 9. Carla waited by the mailbox hood, pulled low, hands tucked in the sleeves of her jacket. She didn't ask where we were going. She just got in and buckled her seatbelt like she already knew what this was. The road back to the property felt different at night, quieter somehow, like the trees were listening. I kept the headlights low, cut them completely once we turned onto the gravel path. The camper wasn't there anymore, but 2 other vehicles sat out front. One was the same black sedan I'd seen earlier that week. The other was an older SUV, dusty along the side's passenger window, cracked. No lights in the house, no movement, just stillness. I parked a little ways off behind a line of pine trees and killed the engine. We waited. For a long time, nothing happened. Carla stayed quiet, hugging her knees up to her chest, eyes fixed on the porch. It wasn't until almost 10:30 that we saw the first sign Mike stepped out onto the porch and lit a cigarette. Then the front door opened again and Victor followed him out. He wasn't wearing the cowboy hat this time, just a plain jacket and jeans. He leaned against the railing, speaking low. I couldn't make out the words, but I could read the tension in their body language. This wasn't a relaxed conversation. This was planning. After a few minutes, Victor went back inside and Mike stayed out another minute before flicking his cigarette and locking the door. I exhaled slowly and turned to Carla. If something goes wrong, I said you stay in the car. Do not get out. Understand? She nodded, small and firm. I want to help, she whispered. But I know I'm a kid. I didn't respond, just gave her a quiet nod and opened my door. The air outside was cold for late spring. I moved carefully, sticking close to the trees, staying out of the moonlight. I could see into the living room from the side window, one lamp lit a few pieces of old furniture. Then I saw her, the little girl with the pigtails. Jasmine. She was sitting on the couch legs, tucked under her, looking down at something in her lap. She wasn't crying, but her whole posture, shoulders curled and arms wrapped around herself, told me everything I needed to know. And then someone else walked in. A woman. Auburn hair, tall, thin. She crossed the room slowly, sat down beside Jasmine, and rested a hand gently on her back. That was the moment I saw her face. She turned slightly toward the window, not looking at me, just repositioning herself. But it was enough. The line of her jaw, the shape of her mouth, and then, unmistakable, the slight bend in her left wrist. Helen had been right. I froze, not out of fear, but because I couldn't move, couldn't speak. After all the years, all the false leads and nights spent wondering if hope was just another kind of grief. She was real. Emily. Not a photo. Not a memory. Alive. Inside that house. I don't know how long I stood there. Probably just seconds. But it felt like the world had stopped moving around me. And then I heard footsteps behind me. Gravel shifting. I turned just as Mike's flashlight beam caught my face. You lost? He asked. I stepped back automatically. He lowered the light but didn't smile. I remember you. From town. I'm leaving, I said. Just wanted to check something. That's all. You're not supposed to be out here. Neither are you, I said. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a threat. Why don't we go inside and let the boss know you're here? I hesitated. You can bring the girl too, he added. My stomach dropped. I hadn't realized he'd seen Carla. I looked back toward the car. She was still there, frozen in the passenger seat. I raised a hand and motioned her to stay. Then I nodded at Mike. Fine, I said. Let's talk. He walked a few steps ahead of me, but not far. kept glancing back. When we reached the porch, the door opened before he touched it. Victor stood there. And when he saw my face, he didn't look surprised. Just annoyed. "You again?" he said flatly. "Didn't we already have this conversation? You have something that doesn't belong to you?" I said. "A few things, actually." He stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. "Then come on in. Let's get this over with." The woman, Emily, was standing now. She hadn't moved toward the door, but her eyes were locked on mine. There was something in them I couldn't place. Recognition, yes. But also confusion, fear, hope. I stepped into the house. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Then faintly from outside sirens. Close, not blaring. Controlled, but unmistakable. Victor's face changed immediately. "What did you do?" he hissed. "My wife," I said quietly. "She called when I didn't come back. I guess the police took her seriously." Victor turned to Mike. "Get the girl. And the others." "No," I said. "This ends now." He ignored me, walked toward the hallway. Emily didn't follow. She stood still, eyes darting between us. Then she said my name. Just one word. "Dad." It was soft, tentative. But I heard it. I nodded, voice barely holding. "Emily." Victor stopped in the hallway. "Lena," he snapped. "Get over here. Now." She didn't move. "That's not my name," she said. Her voice was shaking but steady enough. It never was. The sirens were pulling closer. Outside, the sound of tires on gravel, doors opening, shouting. Victor lunged. Not toward the door, but toward me. And just behind him, Mike pulled something from his waistband. I moved on instinct, shoved Carla back through the open door out into the night, and then from inside the house, shouts. A gunshot. Then another. The moment the gun went off, everything dropped into slow motion. I didn't feel the floor under me or the air in my lungs, just the echo of the blast ringing inside my ears. Somewhere in the blur, officers burst through the doorway. I heard shouting. "Drop it!" Hands up, followed by the thud of someone hitting the ground hard. I didn't see who fired the second shot. Didn't know if it came from Victor Mike or the responding deputies. But I saw Victor drop. Not dead, just down, hit in the shoulder, they told me later. Emily Lena stood frozen in the middle of the room. Her hands weren't raised. They were clenched at her sides, trembling like she hadn't breathed in minutes. An officer reached her first, spoke gently. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe. You can come with me." She didn't answer, just let him lead her out. Jasmine followed close behind, carried in the arms of a female officer who moved carefully, whispering something soft and steady as they passed. Carla was outside, already wrapped in a foil blanket, sitting against the front bumper of a patrol car. She jumped up the second she saw Jasmine, ran to her and hugged her tight. Jasmine didn't speak, but she didn't pull away. I watched them both, my legs still rooted where they'd been when I shoved Carla out the door. I didn't feel the blood on my knuckles until someone pointed it out. "You okay, sir?" I looked down. Just scrapes, nothing deep. "Yeah," I said. "I think so." Victor was cuffed and taken out on a stretcher. Mike was in the back of a cruiser, already shouting about lawyers and false warrants. But the search teams didn't stop with the house. They went through the yard, the shed, the camper, everything. In a storage compartment beneath the floorboards, they found items that didn't match the girls we'd seen. Old photo IDs, jewelry, a lock of hair sealed in a plastic sandwich bag. Things that belonged to other people. Things that were never meant to be found. In the basement, there were soundproof panels along the walls. A mattress, bolted hooks, faded chalk marks that might have been names written and erased again. When one of the deputies radioed that in, I had to step outside. I couldn't hear it and stay in the same space. not without breaking. Emily sat in the back of the ambulance wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes stayed fixed on the tree line like she was still trying to wake up. I walked up slowly. "You don't have to talk," I said, "but I need you to know I'm here." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, almost like she didn't believe it herself, she asked, "Is Mom alive?" I nodded. "Yeah." "She's waiting for you." A long silence followed. Then her voice cracked. "I don't remember how to be me." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. I just sat with her until the paramedics cleared her to go. They took her and Jasmine to a nearby hospital for evaluation. Carla went with them, wouldn't leave Jasmine's side. The officers tried to get statements that night, but most of it had to wait. Emily was in shock, physically stable but distant, like her brain had built a wall to keep from falling apart. It would take weeks, months, before she could tell us everything. But even that night she gave them one thing: her real name. "My name is Emily Whitmore," she said, "and I was taken in 1986. That was the line that hit the wire first. The reporters were on it within 24 hours. Most of them got the details wrong. Some called it a cult. Some called it human trafficking. The truth was stranger than either. Victor Manson had taken Emily when she was 12, changed her name, kept her isolated for years, lied to her about the outside world, about her parents, told her she'd been left behind, that no one came looking, that there was no home to return to. Eventually she stopped fighting, learned to play the part he'd written for her. When Carla's sister Jasmine was taken years later, Emily tried to protect her. Hid food, wrote notes, passed them between cracks in the wall. That's how Carla knew her name. That's how she knew to find me. There were others too, some long gone, some rescued, one confirmed deceased. Their stories weren't all the same, but the pattern was. Victor kept control by erasing the truth and replacing it with fear. He used isolation like a scalpel, cutting people off from themselves until they forgot who they were. And he almost got away with it. If not for one pair of rollerblades and a girl who refused to let her sister vanish into silence. The trial didn't start until nearly 9 months later, but by then the case had already drawn national attention. Victor Manson was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, false imprisonment, unlawful restraint, and aggravated assault. The more investigators uncovered from the property photos, journals, recordings, the clearer it became that this hadn't been a one-time offense. It was systematic, cold, rehearsed. The prosecutors called it a decades-long blueprint for human theft. I sat through every day of testimony. Helen did too. So did Carla. She testified quietly but firmly, answering every question about the notes, the hiding places the nights Jasmine had disappeared and come back different. Emily wasn't called to the stand. Her doctor said it would do more harm than good, and the DA agreed. But her name, her real name, was spoken again and again in that courtroom. Not Lena. Emily Whitmore. Sometimes just Emily. That alone felt like a kind of justice. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity, said Victor had suffered trauma of his own, that he believed he was rescuing these girls from broken homes, but there were too many facts, too much planning, and too many lives torn apart. The jury didn't deliberate long. He was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms with no chance of parole. Mike Cooper, his accomplice, took a deal in exchange for full testimony and a list of names. He got 15 years. There were at least 4 other confirmed victims. 2 found, 1 deceased, 1 still missing. And then there were the others, unconfirmed, unnamed. Kids who vanished in the 90s and early 2000s with circumstances just similar enough to raise suspicion. It's hard to say how deep it really went, or how many people looked away because they didn't know what else to do. Emily spent her first weeks after the rescue in a long-term care facility. She didn't want visitors, not even Helen, not at first. She needed time, structure, a place where her thoughts could land without being pulled in a dozen directions. We respected that. When she was ready, she called. Just once. Asked if we'd meet her at the lake, an old fishing spot she remembered from childhood. That was the first time I saw her really smile. Not a full one. Not the kind that reaches all the way up to the eyes. But a start. She hugged Helen first, then turned to me and just nodded. Like she didn't have the words yet, but the silence said enough. We sat there for nearly an hour without speaking. Just watched the water, listened to the wind. She told us small things. What the house had smelled like. How she used to count the ceiling tiles at night. How she'd learned to hide little pieces of herself in cracks and corners so she wouldn't forget who she was. She didn't talk about the worst of it. We didn't ask. When the sun started to dip, she stood and said she was tired but would call us again soon. And she did. Not every week, not even every month, but enough. Her voice got steadier, her steps stronger. She started going by her full name again. Not Lena, not anyone else's version of her, just Emily. Jasmine was placed with a foster family first, but after months of review, Carla's aunt was granted full guardianship. The girls live together now in Oregon, same school, same room. They've got a rescue dog named Dax and a porch swing that Jasmine painted herself. Carla writes sometimes, sends postcards with updates about school and how Jasmine's doing in music class. She says her sister doesn't talk much about before, but she doesn't have nightmares anymore, and that's enough. As for Helen and me, we never sold the house. We thought about it, even packed a few boxes. But something about letting go of that place felt too final. Like we'd be walking away from everything we'd waited for. We updated the windows, redid the garden, put Emily's childhood rollerblades in a shadow box on the hallway wall. They're not there as a memorial. They're there because they were the thing that turned everything. The object no one else noticed. The proof that said she had been real all along. Sometimes justice isn't a verdict or a sentence. Sometimes it's the quiet return of a name. The sound of a daughter's voice saying "Mom" again. The simple fact of presence, of staying, of being found. Sometimes I still hear her voice in the quiet. Not the voice from the courtroom tapes or the interviews or the hospital records. I mean, her real voice, the one I remembered from when she was 12. The way she used to say "Dad" like it was both a question and a promise. I hear it when I walk past her old bedroom. When I close the back gate, she always forgot to latch. It doesn't haunt me. It grounds me. It reminds me what we almost lost. Emily still doesn't like crowds. She doesn't go near dark basements. She keeps the lights on when she sleeps. But she's rebuilding piece by piece. She started painting again, landscapes mostly. Places she remembers or maybe just wants to remember. Her brush strokes are quiet like her voice, but they're steady. She's living with Helen now just outside of town. They take walks in the evenings. No loud streets, no reporters, just air sky and the slow return of peace. Jasmine's growing fast. Carla says she's doing better than anyone expected. She's in therapy and she started writing songs, soft melodies that Carla says sound a lot like hope. They send us cards every few months. Holidays, birthdays, little updates with quiet victories hidden between the lines. Jasmine made the honor roll. Emily baked a pie. No big headlines. Just life finding its rhythm again. There's a memorial now near the woods where the house once stood. The county tore it down within weeks of the trial. No one wanted it to stay standing. Too many memories trapped inside those walls. The land is empty now, just a plaque and a bench. It doesn't list every name, they're still identifying some of the girls. But it says one thing clearly: they were taken, but not forgotten. I sit there sometimes, not often, just when I need to remember that searching matters. That even when the world stops listening, you keep going. You keep asking. You don't put down the photo or the rollerblades or the empty seat at the table. Because sometimes, against every odd, someone answers back. I used to wonder what would have happened if I hadn't walked into that junk shop. If I'd passed by the window. If the owner hadn't remembered the name Lena. But I don't wonder anymore. Not really. Because what brought her back wasn't chance. It was stubborn, relentless love. It was Carla refusing to give up on a sister no one else believed was still out there. It was a girl who, even after years in the dark, still remembered how to whisper her name through a crack in the wall. That's what stays with me. Not the horror. Not the trial. Not even the headlines. It's that quiet voice saying I'm still here. And the simple truth that someone heard her. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name gets left behind.